And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, great scholars. Thank you so much once again for joining us tonight. Yeah, I understand. Tonight, today, we've got many um, uh, competing priorities and interests. Earlier on, we had our budget speech, and I know that tonight, many South Africans are just glued on their TVs watching what is happening in Washington, D.C. But thank you, God, that at least we now have that something that is called recording in our TV or on our TVs, or even um, um, uh, rewind. So really, there shouldn't be and I'm saying this with respect. There shouldn't be any excuse for anyone not to be here, but we understand. The thing is there are certain things that at least you can still catch up, but this session tonight, you may not be able to catch up again. So thank you so much for joining us. Tonight we are discussing a very important leadership topic. Um, Leadership topic, which is I'm trying to move to okay, leadership topic, conscious leadership. We are discussing conscious leadership tonight, and I'm going to um, uh, um, uh, introduce our guest speaker shortly. My name is Mazwe Majola. I'm from the Worldwide Institute of Leadership and Development. We are here every Wednesdays, weekly. We are here. We've been doing this since 2020. And you know, the sessions that we've had, the topics that we've covered, the leaders, speakers that have addressed us, unbelievable, and we're still standing. And we thank God for that. Thank to you, many thanks to you who have been really watching and joining us every Wednesdays. I see so many of you here, and I want to welcome you and thank you that we learn so much every Wednesdays. This is our master class. You want to be a great and effective and a world-class leader. There's no way you should not be, or you can't afford to miss these sessions, because they really equip us and they develop us and they empower us. That is why many great leaders and scholars that always tune in on Wednesday. Because of that, we learn, or rather, we come here to learn, to unlearn, to relearn, and to co-learn. Because, as we always say, we believe that leadership is a journey. Leadership is not a destination. So, you want to be a great leader, you've got to constantly develop yourself. Let me not waste your time. And I know that we are here for our great speaker, and I want to thank you for it. By the way, let me give a special welcome to those colleagues who are joining us for the first time. If you are here for the first time, thank you so much for joining us. This is a safe space. It's a community of leaders. We've got leaders from all walks of life. So you've got academics from different universities. We've got leaders from public sector, from private sector. We've got religious leaders, community leaders. As long as you're a leader, you belong here. So please do not be diffident or be shy. Would like to hear from you if obviously you want to ask any question or make any comment. So really, you are more than happy to participate, and would like to encourage you to participate. We will introduce the speaker, and then the speaker will address us, and then after that we'll just have questions and answers and general conversation. So we allow the speaker to address us first, and then after that we engage the speaker and engage with ourselves. Let me just introduce our speaker, my dear sister, someone I respect a lot, and I'm so happy, I'm so excited, I'm so humble and grateful that in the midst of her busy schedule, very, very busy schedule, she accepted our invitation. She's not a stranger to Wild. She has addressed us before. We had a conference and a book launch where she was one of our speaker. That is why I'm so humbled that again she has availed herself tonight to come and mingle with great speakers, or rather great leaders here. And so we are so glad. Sis Taelo Mojepelo is the Chief Executive Officer of BP Southern Africa. And she's an experienced business leader with over 20 years of professional experience in Africa and a wealth of commercial and operational experience in supply chain, leadership, strategy, and operational excellence across various industries. Taelo holds an MBA from Gibbs, also a master's degree in environmental engineering from Cambridge University, and a Bachelor of Science honors degree from the University of Natal. In addition, she is a certified supply chain professional, as well as certified director with the Institute of Directors, South Africa. She's also a non-executive director of the South African Mint Company, the South African Banknote Company, and previously sat on the Wits Business School's African Energy Leadership Center Advisory Board. Amongst other accolades, she has received the much coveted 2023 Standard Bank Top Woman Business Leader of the Year Award. She is committed to meaningful transformation and actively supports and sponsors the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda within BP South Africa, ensuring teams recognize people's individuality while promoting a high-performance culture in the organization. Taelo believes leading is a personal commitment to contribute meaningfully to the communities in which we live and to foster the next generation of talent. That is Taelo Mojepelo. My sister, thank you so much once again. As I've said, thank you for availing yourself. You and I know how busy you are, but just your humility for coming or to making time to address us, especially in this, as I said, very busy afternoon and evening, but you made commitment to address us. Here are the leaders. They are waiting for you. Conscious leadership. Over to you, sis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. And I must say, it's actually quite interesting that we're talking about conscious leadership today, because today is probably one of those days that calls for serious consciousness. But anyway, thank you for the warm welcome. And I'm actually quite pleased to be speaking to this group of leaders. I always say to people, leadership starts when you're a preschooler, literally. Because we all think leaders are people who are established, but we all start by leading ourselves. And the consciousness starts from childhood. And if we don't take cognizance of that, we sometimes get lost. But having said that, what I want to focus on is really a topic that is very close to my heart. But as we go through it, I'll speak to it. I have a few slides because I was thinking, we all absorb information differently. I often prefer to speak from the heart. So I will share some slides, but if I don't go, slide by slide, you'll get to understand, because this is a topic that is quite close to my heart. So if you can just give me a moment so I can just prepare the screen. So probably just to start and frame our conversation, when we set this up, actually, we were not even aware that we would have, our president out in the US, and Budget 3.0 would be tabled today. But it's actually quite apt because, if we're referencing the scholars Tundepi and Fildyun, just to read it out, it says, leaders who recognize and embrace globalization, diversity, multiculturalism, internationalization, and the associated complexities will be able to pave positive pathways for a sustainable future. So let's think a little bit about this. You know, today's world is quite volatile, extremely uncertain, and it really calls for leaders who actually understand the big picture and recognize the significant inequality that exists and embraces the power of a global of a global world. However, obviously, what we do see today is, quite a significant pulling back and more nationalization and drawing back from the global world. And it actually gets me to think quite a bit and ask myself, are we really being conscious leaders? Yes, we probably are taking positions that interest us in a selfish way. And I say selfish way because each nation looks at what's best for them. But in the bigger global order, is that really the right thing to do? But having said that, I think that really then talks to who we are as a world and as a people and nation. And the one common thing that binds us together is a sense of humanity and purpose. And we should actually all be striving for that. But if we think about consciousness or conscious leadership as a concept, quite a number of words come to mind. Self-awareness, purposeful leadership, self-reflection, adaptive leadership, capitalism as well. That comes through emotional intelligence. And, we all choose to define it in ways that work for us based on our own value systems. But having said that, for me, the one thing that is quite critical and important when we talk about conscious leadership is the whole concept of inclusion. If we don't have inclusion, we actually do not recognize, and we actually don't recognize the need to understand that we are all different, and in our diversity, we actually can bring something that is a lot more powerful and create a lot more self-awareness of what is actually needed for us as a society. But probably just to reflect, if we think about the world today and look at quite a lot of the reports that have been written, the UN has written reports, McKinsey as well, we look at wealth inequality. The richest 1% hold nearly half of the global wealth. And, my heart goes out to Ramaphosa today because he'll be meeting with some of the richest people in the world and also has to recognize that he's a leader of, South Africa, and being a leader of South Africa, which, is in serious need of a lot more equalization. There's a lot that has got to be balanced. Youth unemployment globally, that remains probably about 3 times higher than adult unemployment globally. And, just recently we had Stats SA publish the workforce survey. And if you look at the expanded definition, just over 60% of South African youth are unemployed. And that's a crisis on its own. And, we often have to ask ourselves, what is to become of this? Because if you think about, policy gaps in representation, who are the people that are actually defining the policies? And we actually are in a situation today where you have what I call the minority of the population. When I say minority, the population that is in minority determining what's best for those that are in majority. And in this instance, if you think about South Africa, for example, our population is largely youth and women. And yet, from a policy-making perspective, they're probably the least represented. And the same goes in corporate. You have about 28% of managerial positions worldwide, and it gets even more dire when you get to C-suite and executive leadership, where you've got the significant underrepresentation. And that really calls for us to actually think about, as conscious leaders, what do we believe will become of a society that is deeply imbalanced. About half of our population, half of the world's population, nearly 4 billion, lack any form of social protection. And that is actually a crisis. And if you sometimes think about some of the crime issues and so forth that play out, a lot of that is driven as a result of that. We look at, the lack of financial inclusion of many communities. And, in many countries, the US, as well as even in South Africa, well, in South Africa and the US, you'll find that, there is a significant exclusion, financial exclusion of a particular population, which actually doesn't bode well for a society in terms of inclusion. And, it's very unfortunate that when you look at some of the recent judgments that have come up from a, gender orientation perspective, we see probably a setback from some of the gains that we've made over the years. And it calls for us to look at things a little differently. Now, the reason why I'm actually starting with this introduction is, when Prof introduced me, the one thing that I'm passionate about, and it drives my consciousness, is the whole concept of DE&I. And it's driven by my values. And if I think about my own value system, it stems from childhood. And, when I've done several talks, I speak about, some of my experiences as a young person and how that has shaped who I am. And I'll talk about 4 of them in terms of those values that actually drive why I lead in the manner that I lead, and why it calls for, and why I'm actually making a crying call for a lot more of our leaders to practice consciousness and for us to be self-aware and what the final call to action would be. So if I think about the first one for me, growing up, I've always said to myself, I can only be who I am as an individual. So it's really about being authentic. You cannot do what you're not capable of doing. And I often look at, people, and for a long time, I actually struggled with this because I don't particularly conform to what some people would call, leaders and what you need to display as a leader in terms of the aggressiveness, in terms of the lack of compassion. And that just isn't who I am. And I wouldn't be able to thrive as an individual in that space. So I always say, speak your truth. And when you speak your truth, it actually gets you to start to behave in a particular way. So that for me is the authenticity. You can only ever lead yourself when you're being authentic, and that gives you the license or the platform to be able to start leading other people. And when you lead other people, you have to do it with integrity. And I'll give you an example. We often make commitments as leaders, but if you then lead in a command and control style, chances are your leader, the people that you're leading, will simply follow you because you hold the title, and not necessarily because they believe in what you're doing. And as a result, the commitments that you then make start to falter. And I've seen this play itself out in many spaces, in terms of, leaders will make commitments with the belief that because they are the leader and they've commanded, it will be executed. It doesn't work that way. And I'm sure, many of us as leaders in this forum, we've spoken about emotional intelligence. We've spoken about, stakeholder impact, and why that's very important for us to actually understand that as human beings, we respond to a stimulus that builds, that stems from psychological safety. And if you don't have a psychologically safe environment, you don't follow through on those commitments. Or if some of that gets delivered, it gets delivered in a somewhat lukewarm manner. And so for me, over the many years that I've actually grown as a leader, that has often been something that I've really thought about. How do I bring people along with me such that I maintain integrity, and what I commit, I deliver on? The third one for me is, justice. I grew up in a home where, my dad was part of the era that was really fighting for justice. And in the process, as you grow up, you see when things are not right, you actually are taught to speak up about it. And, I was often called a troublemaker because, I literally hung out with people of the opposite sex, the boys, and I never had a doll. In fact, my parents never bought me a doll. I always had to play with, toy cars and wire cars, and that's just who I was. So I grew up almost being the person that goes against the grain, but at the same time, I'd be the one person that actually speaks out when something isn't right. And I know it's a very difficult thing, and sometimes people think it's quite easy to tell people speak out, but a lot of this stuff is really ingrained with how we are raised and how we choose to unlearn some of the habits that we have been raised with, because some of the stuff we actually have to learn as adults, and we've got to unlearn some of those habits. I'm a mother of two boys, and many people found it quite uncomfortable when I've always raised my boys. They're now, one is an adult, the other is a teenager, and I've always encouraged them to just speak out. And what I've seen, what that has done for them, both as leaders in the school environment and in the extramurals that they participate with, and the confidence that it brings them. So that sense of justice actually gets you to have a deep belief in the fact that you can actually deliver on something and you actually want to fight for what is right. But you can't do that in the absence of courage. And that sometimes calls for you to actually speak out when you gain this courage to speak out when you see that something isn't quite right, or when you believe that something needs to be done such that you make a change. And if you're not anchored by your own values, and by the way, all of us as leaders, there are many conscious leaders and people who practice conscious leadership, but ultimately we're driven by our own values, and you see that play out in the individual as they go about leading. And so for me, the one thing that's very close to my heart, and even as I've took the helm of BP as an organization, I looked at where we were as an organization, the period that we're in. In fact, I joined to lead this business at the height of COVID. We're in a hard lockdown. We actually didn't know each other, and you've got to lead people that you've actually never met at the time, but at the same time, you've got a crisis, you've got COVID playing out, you've got the crude price crushing, you've got a cost of living crisis at the same time, costs are going through the roof, and a business needs to survive. And you can only do that by working with people, and you work with the people that are in your organization, but you can only do so if you have a diverse community. And what do I mean by diverse? Often because of the history that we have as South Africa, we often think of diversity as black and white. And that for me is, probably what I would call a shallow way of looking at diversity. When you put a strong team together, you put a strong team of diverse thinkers, because we all come from different backgrounds. Diversity in terms of gender, because of our, own makeup and how we view how we view life, and our perceptions and experiences actually shape the thoughts that we bring through. But also making sure that you bring the generation spectrum. It's often quite sad when you look at a group of leaders and you see you probably only have a group of baby boomers or Generation X. You actually need to ensure that you've got that diverse grouping. And, coming into this organization, there were a couple of things that really had to step back and look at and say, okay, what actually needs to happen? How do I actually use the agency that I have as an individual to actually get my ethos through into the organization. And, I think I was fortunate in the sense that, I joined an organization where some people also recognized the need for that. And it gave me an opportunity to continue what I call the D&I journey. And why do I say continuing? Because, if you think about it, in various quarters, there is a bit of a setback in terms of how we view inclusivity. But then again, your courage needs to come out and say, I know I have a responsibility to ensure that I preside over a profitable business, turn around a business, get it to deliver, but delivering with inclusivity. And that's often a very difficult task because, you'd ideally, many people would say, but why should I have to do that? I'm just going to bring like-minded people and, deliver what I have to deliver now and move on. And the next person sees it. We'll see. I call it see to finish. And that's not necessarily something that takes us far in life. So, with that ethos, going on this D&I journey, looked at, what's important. And if you think about D&I, some of the white papers that have been written, companies that actually deliver on D&I commitments are about 3.5 times likely to outperform financially their peers. They're more innovative because you actually have a lot more youth participating in there. And so, God said, look, how do we get into action? And we summarized this in a white paper that were published. I worked with another professor and a lady called Keti Wanguna from Accenture. And the purpose of this paper that I participated in was to actually tell my story, or tell the story of me leading in BP and, the journey that I went through and how we went about ensuring that we have a diverse organization, but at the same time, the financial metrics actually show, progress and growth and, strategic growth. And I mean, as we sit today, as I took over the business, the market share was at a particular point. So I don't really want to get into the details, but having grown now 5 years down the line, and in a very challenging market, having gained an additional 3 percentage points market share really does point to the work that has been done by the amazing young men and women that have really been hungry to want to change this organization. So we've actually got to a point where we've got a gender diverse organization at 48%, and improved our financial performance, but also even from an ESG perspective, as well as CSI, really made sure that we've turned that around. So if I just probably cover it in about 6 points. The first thing was, you step into an organization, you've actually got to make sure that from a policy perspective, you have the right policies and practices. And most importantly, that actually drives behavior. And you've got to lead from the top. If you don't lead from the top and you don't role model and practice some of these things, it never becomes a reality, but you've got to have the future in mind. So we set about as a team of, diverse people to reevaluate these policies and practices, and, came up with some good policies and practices around how we define talent, how we develop even people who are not viewed as talent, but at the same time are very solid in the business, help us deliver what we have to deliver, because everybody plays a role in an organization. Because what tends to happen is you walk into an organization and you see, oh, there are HR policies for this, and these are standard HR policies, without actually recognizing that you've got a future strategy and how do you set your organization up and develop talent, bring in talent, but also develop young people to ensure that you actually are set up for future orientation. So that was the first thing to do. Now, linking those KPIs as well to leaders' accountability, ensuring that every leader is accountable for the inclusivity agenda that we are on. And, many a time, people like to put KPIs such as you'd want a 50-50. And I always say those are extremely faulty KPIs because those are outcomes. And those outcomes are as a result of the activity that we have put in place in order for you to deliver those outcomes. So while it's all noble to say you actually will measure somebody in the outcomes, how you do it is important. So I call it the what and the how. So rather than just putting those outcomes KPIs, you put in KPIs such as, your ability to develop talent of a particular profile, your ability to lead and manage your teams for performance, and making sure that that team that you're managing, as you assess your performance, that it is actually you've taken into account all the various measures around diversity that need to take place. And we obviously use data, because the trouble with a lot of calibration that we get into as leaders is, a lot of times it tends to be quite subjective. But if we start using data to monitor these strategies, we become fact-based. And often when you become fact-based, it can be very uncomfortable sometimes, but people then get, with time, they get used to this and they say, okay, this is how we measure, because we actually use data. We are informed by data. We're not necessarily informed by perception, and, our performance management rigor is not as strong, but because somebody probably speaks better than the other person, they are perceived to perform better. And, a country like South Africa is often a very challenging one, because we come from different backgrounds. And what you'd sometimes find is, somebody who's probably a lot more well-spoken may be perceived to perform better, but the data doesn't actually say so. And you're then driven by emotion. So you need to take that bias out and use data rather. The next one was really around upholding organizational justice. In upholding that organizational justice, how do we make sure that we cultivate behaviors that recognize that, we have to do what is right for individuals. We have to comply with what is legislatively bound, what we're legislatively bound to comply with, but at the same time, go over and beyond, driven by the organization's culture and value systems that exist. And who leads the culture? It's the leaders. And, while we want to build a learning organization, learning culture, once you become a leader, I expect that you are held accountable for culture. And if you're not aligned to the culture, you're probably better off elsewhere and not in the organization, because the longer you leave leaders that don't align to a culture and exhibit behaviors that are not conducive to youth learning and to people feeling safe from a psychological safety perspective, you'll struggle to achieve your objectives as an organization. The next foundation that I've spoken about in quite a few forums is how do we learn from other successful inclusion initiatives? And there are instances, for example, if you look at the organization that I lead, we have put together initiatives through a trust called the Energy Mobility Education Trust, recognizing South Africa's history, and put a lot of effort into supporting the education needs of previously disadvantaged and ensuring that you can actually change. Because when you educate previously disadvantaged people, you are likely to take probably at least 8 to 10 people out of poverty, and you change their lives for the better. And it then you start to build a generation of different individuals who will then make it better for the next generation. The last one for me is what I call a sense of belonging. When you're part of an organization and you're leading this organization as a conscious leader, you have a responsibility to actually create an organization where there's a sense of belonging. And we do it, although I've called it, supporting employee resource groups. You want to enable employees to get together about what actually matters most to them, aligned to the culture that we as leaders have actually inculcated in the organization. Because if you don't do that and create space, and I'm talking about creating space even during working hours to speak about some of these issues, you create an organization of robots who just come into work, do their work, and go away. I mean, in fact, incidentally, today we had a session on well-being, supporting our elderly, recognizing that a lot of us probably have to are supporting elderly people given the macroeconomic environment and the fact that older people's pensions have somewhat dwindled, and we all have that responsibility. So how do we get together as an organization and talk about some of the difficult things that people struggle to talk about? So, and in doing so, you actually are building an organization where somebody comes to work and they want to show up as their best. But at the heart of it, for us as leaders, we need to actually ensure that we nurture an environment where all employees feel valued and empowered to contribute. Because if they don't feel empowered to contribute, you'll start to get a silent organization. And how do we do this? We prioritize effective communication, transparency, even on some very difficult things can be challenging, but also making sure that from a cultural intelligence perspective, we train each other to recognize that we are different and we actually need to recognize each other's contributions. But having said that, we're part of a bigger environment, and in being part of this bigger environment, we've got to recognize that whatever we do internally, that has to multiply externally with our suppliers and making sure that we actually bring them along that journey. And, there's a lot of work that we've done in the last 5 years, just ensuring that even from our supplier base, the notion of diversity and inclusion comes through. And we are quite, and I put it this way, probably say unapologetic about the type of suppliers that we engage with. And, as I look ahead, I'm actually envisaging an environment where many other organizations recognize the importance of having of inclusivity and recognizing what it actually does for communities. But having said that, next month is Youth Month, and we will get to see a lot of commitments coming through. And what actually saddens me a lot is, with the youth unemployment, we have significant challenges ahead of us. We recognize that we've got to do a lot more for youth. And, I'd like to appeal to a lot more leaders to give youth an opportunity. And if I look at the organization now that, I lead, we've been able to kind of over the years, just shift and give a lot more youth opportunities. And today, as we sit, about a third of our organization is youth. And when I say youth, anyone over 35, you're not. So if you're Generation X, like I am, you don't form part of the youth category, but making sure that we need to be a lot more acutely aware of the responsibility that rests upon us as the current leadership to ensure that the next generation of leaders are nurtured with innovation in mind, efficiency and organizational success. And we need that because that also helps us in terms of bringing in foreign direct investment. Going back to the conversation we started earlier on, we have big conversations taking place today. And if we are going to exclude the youth in those conversations, I think we've lost an opportunity. And I think today, one of the things that we could have also probably included in there is probably a delegation with 1 or 2 youth who can actually speak about what it is that the youth can contribute in order for it to be a more diverse economically active group. But having said that, I think not all is lost. And, there's a lot more we can do as organizations such that we also break that proverbial glass ceiling for the youth. And it'd be good to actually get to recognize that you actually can be led by youth. And I always say to people, as a leader, if you're a conscious leader, you need to understand that you can be led, and you can be led by somebody that is younger than you. And as you get into an organization, that person is probably the person that's going to teach you how things are done, and you bring your wisdom to make things a lot better. So I think having said all of that, for me, the call to action is really around, as conscious leaders, how do we actually develop self-awareness? We've got to actually make sure that we nurture that EQ muscle a lot more. And I think the world is in need of that EQ muscle and getting it to be, nurtured significantly. We need to practice a lot more mindfulness. And in practicing mindfulness, just making sure that, we are aware of some of the challenges that exist, and as leaders that we support all those initiatives that need to that need to take place, and because in the absence of doing that, we'll find ourselves in a very challenging situation. But again, as you run an organization, it's more than profit or personal success. It's really around purpose and what we do to cultivate that purpose. And we've also got to be prepared to learn and unlearn. There's a lot of things that we learn, but as society changes and things change, how do we actually recognize that there are new things we have to learn? We can see there's so much volatility going on. We've got to respond to situations as they evolve. So I think for me, really, to conclude so that we can have a lot more time for engagement is, if I conclude with this thought that says, the more conscious we become as leaders, the better we can contribute to a more equitable and just society for all South Africans. That, for me, is conscious leadership. So thanks, Prof, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts, and really just what conscious leadership is in practice and how I have practiced it. And incidentally, I mean, as I won the Standard Bank Top Women Leaders Award, it really was around this whole notion of conscious leadership and inclusion, and making sure that, we all understand the importance of it and what it can actually do for an organization. And it has helped us grow from strength to strength. Thank you, Prof.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, my sister. Thank you so much. So insightful, very informative. Thanks a lot there. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to, I always say I respect these men and women who always come here, because I know how powerful, how important, how busy you are. And I always really want to give you more time to engage with the speaker and also with each other. Now it's a time to ask questions and to make comments and to discuss. You can do that via the chat room, or you can express yourself, because obviously, as I said, we are leaders here. So it's always good to hear from each other. So you can do that, and then we can recognize you. So, Sister, what leaders or what colleagues are still coming? I know if you're an advocate of DEI, the AfriForum, and we had even AfriForum, DA, and all this other organization. We also even had from Elon Musk here, who in his what to call it, that video he made. South Africa has got about plus minus 140 race-based laws. Do you think really, honestly, we still need the policy like that in South Africa after 30 years?
You want me to be a politician now?
I
No,
want you
okay.
to
So
be,
if I,
I want you to be a leader.
yes. Yeah. No, so, my view, and it may be contrary to what people may anticipate. The biggest injustice that I think is taking place at the moment is we had an opportunity as a country to, there was a good reason why, a good purpose and good reason why those policies were put in place. But what saddens me is at an execution level, it doesn't happen. So my direct answer to you would be 30 years down the line, we don't need those laws because we failed to do something with those laws. And in saying so, what we actually need is a probably a call to action as a society to recognize the importance of inclusion and really calling for a lot more consciousness within ourselves, because those policies existed, but we couldn't implement them. So it calls for us to go back and say, what do we actually need to do? And if there's a set of policies taking into account today's environment, and when I say today's environment, things have moved on, things have changed. I would actually even advocate more for policies that support youth, more than just saying, you've got BEE and so forth. Because the trouble with a lot of these laws, we've not executed them well, and it has increased inequality in South Africa. Those are the unintended consequences, in my view, of these laws. And why has it done so? We have found ways around working it. So the haves have found ways of working around this and benefiting from these laws, whereas those that it was intended to address continue to to live in squalor and are in abject poverty, and are then subjected to 350 per month that they have to get. So there's something that needs to change. And yeah, that's me speaking from the heart as a leader.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my sister. Thanks a lot. I see that Professor Zide, it's left already. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, my professor, if you're still here. You know that you are always here with us. Thank you very much. I think BP is so blessed and lucky that it's got the CEO that is driving these policies at a CEO's level. I want to assume that it is driven from the CEO's office, as you said, that it must come from the top. Otherwise, if it's not coming from the top, it's not going to be effective or successful. How have you found linking DI to KPIs challenging or gaps there? What has been your experience? Because if you're going to really say, as you said, that one of the things important is to link these two so that those people who are working and those managers and executives to hold them accountable. You've got to say, let's see what have you delivered in your departments and in your teams. How challenging is that? And obviously, maybe what we are leaders here, that some people are here are running big organizations, departments, and teams. And that's your guidance, my sister.
Yeah, it's an interesting dance, and I call it a dance because it must be exciting at the end of it all. But maybe just to start by saying this D&I is actually led from the board level, even before me. But how do we get the board to actually buy into it is through the leadership, through me holding myself accountable and making commitments to the board, which then forces me to be held accountable to what I have committed to, in a sense, And as an organization, together with my executive team, they have all also signed up to this. So in signing up to this, when you now then talk about performance, you as a leader, when you then recruit, you've got to make sure that you've got this balancing act while you know that you've got to be inclusive, you have to drive very hard on performance. And this is where I actually sometimes even say you get excellence in youth and you get Black excellence coming through, because you are able to, in your assessment, you are able to actually identify what gaps exist in the organization in terms of skills gaps, how you need to train or create programs in place. And I must say, incidentally, in 2022, we co-created programs with Wits University, Gibbs and Duke, for different purposes, recognizing some of the gaps that existed and really targeting the groups that we had identified that we need to build those skill sets in. And that actually then helps translate into performance. But I must say, having said that, it's not all rosy, because sometimes you then have to have very difficult conversations. And it's sometimes disheartening when you've put in a lot of effort into an initiative and you have the difficult conversation and you have to part ways, in a sense, because ultimately, at the end of the day, performance is what keeps your organization alive. Because, I say to people, you can drive D&I, but if it's D&I is not, if it doesn't go to the bank, then it's pointless. So you've actually got to make sure that you can see it in the bank, and in you seeing it in the bank gives you the impetus to do a lot more and to sustain the journey that you're on. And you hold your leaders accountable. So it's in their KPIs, it is linked to the actual performance KPIs, and that those need to come through. So you cannot deliver your numbers with a team that's not diverse, because then it's going to hit your own pocket at some point in terms of, we all have incentives and recognition. So the reward and recognition as well has got to come in there, and that's got to be reflected.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. They're very, very, very helpful and very insightful to hear that. Thanks a lot. And then obviously, as you said, that the value system of a conscious leader, it will include courage. You've got to be courageous, as you said, that holding those executives and leaders accountable. You've got to believe in it. You've got to have that authenticity and integrity. And thank you so much for that. Do you think conscious leadership is getting there? I mean, do people really understand that there's this leadership, that as a leader, you've got to be conscious about what is happening to you? After you've answered or you responded to this, I see Sis Nomkita there. Will take Sis Nomkita after that. Go ahead, my sister.
Yeah, I actually don't know if I can't really respond to that question, as in, do I believe that we've made progress? Because I tend to have mixed experiences. And I mean, I'm just making myself vulnerable, and we're having an honest conversation here. You walk into environments where you're all leaders. And when you sometimes listen to the type of statements and conversations that take place, you start asking yourself, are we actually making progress, or are we leaders for self-interest? Are we interested in the justice that we need to actually embark on? And when I say justice, it just could be various things. I mean, I have sometimes had to preside over literally counseling and coaching young, other people that, they'll tell you conversations about how they're finding it very difficult in their workplace because of behaviors, and not because they're not capable of doing the work. And so I sometimes am conflicted, and I think more of these conversations, and I mean, you're doing a great job, Prof, in creating this consciousness around, we've got to talk as leaders. As it is, as a society, we are all dealing with a lot of issues. I started with the global context. It's not easy. The macroeconomic context, the social context, it's not easy. And particularly when you're in a country such as South Africa, it actually isn't easy. So when somebody comes to work, they already come to work heavily burdened by all those other issues that they've got to deal with. And I think for leaders, we've got to get around together a lot more and be a lot more conscious of that, because the trouble is, as leaders, we tend to have sheltered lives. We've got helpers who do things. We have got drivers who take us. So you actually are probably not even aware of some of the issues that other people have to deal with. And we come to work and place undue pressure, and that actually starts resulting in mental health issues as well. And that's a topic we sometimes don't talk about. So yeah, I'll pause at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Let's take Sis Nomkita. Nomkita, over to you, Sis.
So thank you, Prof, and thank you to Madam CEO for a sobering and yet practical talk around how we can do leadership in a conscious manner. But I think I'd like to first start by congratulating you on your results in the last 5 years at PP together with your team. This is what we would like to see as Black leaders, and be able to celebrate each other's wins and each other's successes as we go along. So we really wish to congratulate you on that. I raised my hand, Prof, because I wanted to go back to the first question that you asked, and particularly the response that talks to the fact that because we as a country were not able to implement the same BEE laws that we had put together. And the response from the Madam CEO says, well, perhaps we should do away with those because we have not been able to implement. Now, my question was, because we've been unable to implement, is that a good enough reason to say, let's throw the baby with the bathwater? Or should we not focus on the policies themselves were correct, but then we need to sharpen our tools of implementation? But I also want to touch on something you said earlier in your talk that spoke about how policy is left to the other than the people that it should serve. You specifically mentioned youth and women as the majority. In fact, how you put it was the minority tends to be the ones that dictate policy for the majority. And I thought that was really a good insight. And that's something that we need to start thinking about as a country, and that not a lot of our youth are in policy-making spaces, and sometimes not a lot of women, except if they are in gender based roles. So I really thought that was something that was interesting that you spoke about. But please, if you can just go back to your response. You did say it was your view around whether we should still need the laws, or fix the implementation part thereof, or a bit of both. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for that question. I think on your comment, I think fully agree in terms of the minority, but on the first one, in terms of policy, what I mean by that, and I think when I finished off the statement, was we've got to go back to the drawing board. I actually do not see the laws as they were set back then, 1994 to 1996, as probably being relevant to today's circumstances. And I'm not saying we do not need policies. Every organization, and South Africa being SA Inc., needs policies. But the question is, I'm of the view that we don't have the right policies today. And we need to go back to the drawing board as a nation and have a consensus conversation that speaks to inclusion and speaks to the fact that we need a different set of laws. And the example that I gave, and probably to give it a bit more elaborately, is you bring in BEE and you create business moguls, if I call it that. So somebody comes in, we create a 30% structure. They don't participate in that business. They simply really reap the rewards of, of having been given that 30% because they're probably politically connected, or it makes sense for the business owner that needs to actually comply with the 30%. Yet at the same time, there is a broad base of people in South Africa, a significant population that actually needs to be empowered, rather. And then obviously there are some laws, such as, for example, your employment equity. It's actually a good thing that that law was revised and we have something that is up to date and refreshed for today's purposes. And I think that is something that we should all rally behind. I'm of the view that we've taken too long still harping on the same policies, and those policies need significant revision to make sure that they are relevant for today. And today we've got different circumstances, and some of those circumstances are actually worsening because the laws that we had are somewhat promoting the significant inequality. I sometimes look around, you drive around and you see the obscene wealth that is, held by some of the beneficiaries of this so-called BEE, and that has not been spread around to the bulk of the population. So the question that I ask myself is, are these the right policies? I don't think so. And I think we need to actually have a different conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Stella. And I completely agree with you, because yes, we are still not there. We are on the journey of transformation, but the disappointment and the difficulty is that 30 years, actually, we are still reinforcing them instead of reviewing them and say, by now, after 30 years, we're at a point where we've really made strides. So let's just review and see what is left, what can we still put more. But indeed, I agree with you, and I agree with Ms. Nomkita that it's not the policies per se, but the implementers. So unfortunately, policies were drafted, were designed, but people were supposed to implement them, but also people were, yes, implemented them in terms of the reinforcers, but those especially in the big corporates and others, because as we all say, SOEs are doing much better. The problem is with private sector. And why? Because they resisted those who were supposed to push it at a top level, like Sister is doing at BP. They resisted them. But now they're still talking about, we are still talking about transformation or race-based laws instead of doing something different. And I agree with that. But unfortunately, at a time when it was supposed to be embraced and supported and implemented, certain companies resisted and pushed them back. And that is where we are now, which is very, very unfortunate, because really, it will be very sad that our grandchildren will still be talking about balancing the playing field in South Africa, that we're still talking about transformation. Us, we are intergenerational from apartheid to where we are now. But there are those who are coming after us, really. By the time they come, very unfortunate if they still be talking about this. But let's hear Mohansi there. Over to you, Mohansi.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much, Taelo, for such an insightful information. I just wanted to find out, as we are working on pushing in youth within the organizations, do we have a model that is speaking now to this society that is also growing, which is from 40 to 50, 55, that is probably being phased out? Do we have a plan for skills transfer so that we shouldn't lose as the country the skills that we're having, so that we can move forward as well, accommodating them as well? Secondly, in in most organizations, let's say, for example, you are now entering into a organization as a leader, you find out the organization that you're joining, in terms of the culture, they are not seriously performance driven. How do you then help such a leader that wants to drive in performance and using data, but the data as well, it's very skewed and it doesn't help you to implement the modules that you actually would help the organization moving forward? Thank you.
Okay. No, thanks. And this is why I actually talk about inclusion. If we talk about this population of 40 to 55, and it's actually, South Africa is facing a significant crisis in the sense that as unemployment in general rises, you will have all groups impacted. But what we're also sitting with is a situation where we have, you know, this group that you'd call the 40 to 55 skilled, stable, but at the same time, they also have significant responsibilities that they have to that they have to honor in their personal lives. And it's very important that in whatever you do, it's not about taking out and replacing. If you're then saying, okay, now we've got this group that's 40 to 55, how do we actually upskill them? Some of them you put programs in place, you encourage them from an entrepreneurship perspective. We have some employees that actually have gone out, and some of them are actually now retailers in our network, as in, you know, they actually own retail sites. And, you know, probably even some of our employees are probably envious of them because they now have got much, they pay themselves better than some of those that are in there. So every organization should use the tools that it has in place to recognize that, you know, you have some that are exiting, and as they exit, you know, we've got processes in place to make sure that you support tools, you support with entrepreneurship skills, and some want to do different things. And how do you actually put aside resources to make sure that that does take place? While at the same time, as you bring in youth, you have to put an extraordinary amount of time to ensure, and time and resources to ensure that you train them, but at the same time, partnering them with the more skilled, because that's only how you do skills transfer. Skills transfer doesn't happen in the classroom. Ultimately, you know, we all go, we learn, we've got MBAs, and yes, Prof, I mean, we come to your lecture rooms, but we're all aware that in order for you to deepen and hone in your skills in the workplace, it's exposure, it's different, it's blended learning. And that's why the professors call it blended learning and so forth. So you've got to partner with the older people, but recognizing that, you know, there is room to actually develop a different skill set. And, you know, I've given an example of BP, but another company may have another solution in place, but you've got to recognize that you cannot just discard and throw out and simply think, okay, we're going to bring in the youth. So it's a concerted effort across the generations. And that's why earlier on in my talk, I said, look, you've got a spectrum of generations, your baby boomers, your X's and so forth. And how do you look after each generation at different stages of their lives? And even if you talk about in the workplace, you have got women that are of child rearing age. How do we create supportive environments such that they don't fall off and make a choice to become caregivers because it's just too difficult to work? So you have to understand the different groupings that you're actually working with in the organization, and try your best. You know, sometimes you won't get it right. And I could be sitting here and someone says, you know, I had a bad experience at BP. That's possible. But because you may not get something right at some point, and you miss something because you also have leaders that you rely on to drive certain things. And ultimately, it's the workplace is a human to human interface. But for as long as you as the leader, you know, you role model and you make sure in every organization and in the skip level conversations that you have, you're not just talking to your executive team, you're talking to the whole organization. You're having your couch sessions, you're going into the field, you're going on the ground, having your one-on-one conversation with the guy that actually has to open the valve that makes sure that, you know, your fuel is released. You have to be on the ground and understand how the culture is being experienced in the organization. I hope I've answered your question.
Absolutely, no, that's fine. You've answered, my sister. Thank you so much. And I like your emphasis on blended learning, because indeed, performance organization will have to blend between the experience and potential. You need experienced, those who have been there for so many years, because they know how things are done. But fortunately, because we are all going forward, there's no retrogression. You're going to lose these people. The more they are experienced, so you need to obviously look at those who are joining the organization with their passion, with their energy, with their innovation, but you cannot also focus more or solely on potential. It's a matter of how you blend them while these ones are exiting, and then we are bringing the youthfulness one in the organization. Thank you so much, Mrs. I think maybe we can now, or I see Sister Nomkita want to come back. I'll suggest that after you respond to Sister Nomkita, Sister Taelo, then you can just give us your closing remarks and your parting shots, and then we close this session. Sister Nomkita, over to you.
Thank you again, Prof. You know, I was just reflecting on this lecture today and looking at, let's take BP as an example. And that because of the conscious leadership that the leaders from the top all the way to whatever levels that are required have implemented. And so therefore we see the results. So it got me thinking about SA Inc. What do we do as leaders if we have within South Africa organizations that do work, they do succeed, and the results are good. We see them in front of us. But then as a country, you know, we see that things are not going as they should. And I mean, I'm not naive not to know why some of those reasons are, that we do not have conscious leadership at the right levels, particularly in government. But I'm just trying to think, and this is a question I have every week as we engage here, is how do we turn the results of what we are talking about every week and all the good lessons that we find from each other, because there are pockets of excellence. How do we turn those around so that we can make a difference in our country and contribute? I mean, I was reflecting this morning about what Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso. In 2 years, he's turned things around so much without the necessary help of, well, necessary, I'm using it very loosely, without the help of external governments, and really looking within and using whatever resources they have. But the question directly to the CEO is really about how is it that we could take the lessons that we find from the private sector that are working and bring them through to the public sector. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the way I want to preface it is, you know, with the adage that we all tend to talk about, culture is strategy for breakfast. And why am I bringing that in? Organizations that are successful in the private sector have a well-defined culture, and it inculcates throughout the organization, and they deliver on a common goal and purpose. So while it's all good and well to think, okay, how do we communicate, you know, successful areas, pockets of excellence? I think tone from the top is going to be very important for SA Inc. Just like any private sector, tone from the top is what leads it. And that tone from the top sets the culture. So it's unfortunate that, you know, I'm going to say something that I say in my own circles, which can be very challenging sometimes. I say, you know, sometimes I wonder if South Africa deserves democracy. But anyway, that's a story for another day. But having said that, you know, you need a leader that's conscious that we have a culture to turn around. And in turning around that culture, that leader has to actually, you know, role model it, lead from the front, be ruthless about his ability to do so. I mean, you gave Traore as an example. You know, he definitely was not elected democratically, but the one thing that he's been clear about, he's had a very clear vision and has been ruthless in executing that vision. And every leader needs to be grounded by those values. We're going back again to values. So we can communicate, as Nomkita, on what good organizations are doing. How do you get it to happen in the public sector? How do we get it to happen in government? But it's all about culture. And if the culture is not actually old culture wiped out, new culture brought in, and that will not change. And it's going to be very important in terms of the tactics of how that wiping out and bringing in takes place, because you also just can't wipe out and bring in that technical sense, because you're creating much bigger problems than you'd have anticipated. So it's actually a difficult journey, but it needs leadership. So we are back again to conscious leadership. Once you're very clear about where you want to go to, you become ruthless about your execution.
Well, thank you, Sis Taelo. Any parting shots there, or are you done? Or are you okay?
Yeah, I think, you know, as we talk about conscious leadership, I'm actually even just reflecting now, thinking, when I finish here, I must go and see what Trump and our president are up to. But it's really around conscious leadership. And if you look at some of the mistakes that we made, even around the budgeting process, there was lack of consciousness. For us to get to 3.0, it also then is another example that shows us that, you know, have we, in this consciousness, have we been self-aware? Have we been clear about the stakeholder impact? Have we, you know, have we been ethical in our decision making, you know? And a lot of those things appear to be lacking. And as they are lacking, the question for us as, you know, leaders, and also as we're bringing in the youth and training them into leadership, is how do we practice a lot more consciousness? And my wish is that, you know, we can actually, even as we, you know, develop MBA programs and so forth, while we teach some of the leadership principles, there's a piece around going back to being conscious and deliberate about doing what's right. And sometimes what's right takes courage, because you're sailing against the wind. And how do you actually develop that courage and inculcate it in order to stay the course? And yeah, I think that's how I would wrap it. Yeah. But thank you to everyone, because I also recognize that, you know, you've taken your, you know, Wednesday evening in the middle of the week, tomorrow is a weekday, to participate in this conversation. And, you know, always very insightful, and your sessions, Prof, are also always very insightful, and you've certainly had, you know, various speakers come through, and there's always something to learn about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my sister. For me, already, it's not only coming on Wednesdays, because at least our members, they are used to it, but really to sacrifice, more especially as we are saying, what is happening tonight or this afternoon. We know that the whole interest is towards of what is happening in Washington, DC. I'm one of those people who's like you. From here, then I'll be going to check what happened or what is happening. But obviously, we respect those who couldn't make it, because maybe they wanted to see it at first hand or first value. We are still going to definitely watch almost everything that happened. We are not going to miss anything, but we are not going to afford to miss this one, because this one is very important, you know. So, but I just want to thank you, Sister Taelo. Once again, as I said in my opening remarks, you are a very busy person, but just your humility to avail yourself, more especially, obviously, when we planned this, we didn't know that today it was going to be that day when our president meeting Trump. But I know that, you know, there will be that thing that, oh, you are going to miss this. But your commitment that you came, what a masterclass on conscious leadership. Thank you so much. We've learned so much from you. Very informative, very insightful and thought-provoking. We'll cherish this for many, many years to come as scholars and as leaders. Just before I close some of the charts there, I did say Professor Zide was apologizing that he had to leave. My colleague there, Dr. Sibongiseni Mkolozeli, is just reminding you colleagues of our YouTube channel. Please do subscribe there. You'll always find all our past videos. Even tonight we post there. So it's always good if you subscribe, because you will get that what reminder that something is coming. So please do subscribe there. The last week is there already. Mohansi thanking Taelo already, Tlengiwe thanking, and then Sisketi thanking there. Yeah, so it's more about thanking everyone, thanking you, and then we appreciate it. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, from my side, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much that you made it. Very difficult, as I said, very difficult evening, but indeed, as we always say, that we took a decision that we were not going to cancel or postpone any of our sessions here, no matter what is happening. Tonight, it was a testament of that. Those who joined us for the first time, please remember that we meet every Wednesdays. Again, next week, Wednesday, we'll be coming back. Same place, same time, same login details, same everything, except different speakers. We'll be bringing another powerful speaker next week with a very interesting leadership topic. We learn every Wednesdays. There is no way we'll attend these master classes and will remain the same. It's part of leadership. It's part of growing leadership. It's about a journey, or it is a journey you've got to learn all the time. Thank you so much. The session is adjourned now until we meet again next week, Wednesday. May God bless you, and may God bless Africa. Thank you and goodbye.